Hello again, it's Dr. Bob Browner with Partnership for a Healthy Lincoln. Now we're going to talk about what's causing the obesity epidemic. In order to solve the obesity epidemic, you have to first figure out what's causing it. And one of the complications with the obesity epidemic is there are multiple causes, and so not just one thing to look at. 5 major causes. Number 1 is too many liquid calories. Number 2, food advertising to children. Number 3, less physical activity for children. Number 4, the economics of food. And number 5, low rates of breastfeeding. First, the too many liquid calories, and these include pop and soda, sports drinks, fruit punches, and energy drinks. If you look at trends over time, back in the 70s, the average child consumed about 70 calories per day of sugar-sweetened beverages. By the 1990-2000 range, it's 190 calories. This alone is enough to explain the epidemic of obesity, actually. 120 extra calories a day translates to about 12 pounds a year gained. Partially, this is offset by the decrease in consumption of milk, which is unfortunate because the kids actually need the protein and calcium, whereas they don't need the sugar. It's kind of scary when you actually look at how many calories the average child drinks. When you actually look at kids who consume sugar-sweetened beverages compared to some who don't at all, the ones who actually do, on average, consume about 224 calories a day, which is about 15 teaspoons of sugar per day. For kids aged 12 to 19 in that teenage years, if they consume at least one sugar-sweetened beverage, it's usually not just one, it's actually on average 3, and so they're on average consuming 356 calories a day. Another problem is too much advertising and television. The average American watches about 4 to 5 hours of television. For kids, they've done studies actually looking at the caloric intake of kids that watch television and found out for every extra hour of TV a child watches, they consume about 167 calories per day. This association is mediated by the increasing consumption of calorie-dense, low-nutrient foods that are usually advertised on television. So in essence, kids eat what they watch. At first, they used to think that television led to obesity because kids didn't move as much, but really they're finding that that actually contributes a very small amount. Mostly it's just the fact that they're eating the foods that they're seeing advertised. With the amount of screen time watched, they've actually translated that to odds of being obese. And for every extra hour that a kid spends in front of the television, there's a 6% increase in the odds of being obese. And even more startling, if a child has a television in his or her bedroom, they have a 31% increased chance of being obese. Another area, like we mentioned earlier, is less physical activity, and this is a worsening trend over time, specifically looking at, for example, children walking to school. Back in 1969, about 42% of children walked to school, and in 2001, only 16% of children walked to school. And this is probably something that's getting worse. Another thing to consider is the amount of physical activity in schools. With the pressures of No Child Left Behind, a lot of schools are cutting access to recess and physical activity to make more time for math and English. And this is actually making things worse. A 2008 study showed that for every extra day of school that high school kids had physical activity, there was a 5% reduction in the odds of being overweight and obese. And if they had 5 days, it was a 28% reduction. And more importantly, this is an effect that lasted over time, so when they followed the children after high school into adulthood, this effect persisted. Another issue is the economics of food. The most calorie-dense, low-nutrition food that we have is also now the least expensive. More nutritious food is getting more expensive. And so we switch from the poor being underweight and malnourished to the poor being obese and malnourished. An example that makes this a little more apparent, this is the Consumer Price Index, noted in dark blue, and you'll see that fresh fruits and vegetables are twice as expensive compared to the Consumer Price Index over the last 20 years, where sugar, sweets, and pop are actually dropping the other way. This is why the dollar value menu meal is so attractive in poorer socioeconomic groups, because it's the least expensive way to fill your stomach. Another surprising thing, here's again the obesity trends shown in a previous section, where you see that 30% of the people being obese is mostly concentrated in the South. You'll see a couple outliers here. Virginia and Minnesota, for example, have very low rates of obesity. You'll see that this atlas is very similar, the same distribution of obesity, and this is actually a slide of the percent of infants born who ever breastfeed, and so it overlaps almost exactly with the obesity slides. And this also overlaps pretty closely with the percentage of people with diabetes as well, and so it kind of shows how all this is linked together.